9 Steps to Scaling Your Enterprise Content Impact with Jared Keleher. The In Search SEO Podcast is brought to you by Similarweb, helping you build better SEO strategies with digital intelligence, insights, and data. Hey, it's David. What are some of the key ways to enhance the impact of your enterprise content? That's what we're covering today with a man who's passionate about combining organic content with performance marketing to drive meaningful, measurable impact. He spent the last 4 years scaling the content operation at Wise, a global technology company focusing on building a game-changing way to move money around the world. A warm welcome to the In Search SEO Podcast, Jared Keleher.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hey Jared, thanks so much for joining. Well, you can find Jared over at wise.com. So Jared, is content marketing as effective as it used to be?
It is incredibly effective if you do it in the right way, I suppose, is the easiest way to put it. I think on the flip side, it's also incredibly easy to get it wrong. And what, as you said in your introduction, that you so kindly put together, I really like to focus on content marketing that can be measurable and can drive impact and can drive performance. So that really is where I start when it comes to thinking about the types of content marketing that are going to lead to results.
So today you're sharing 9 steps to scale your enterprise content impact. Starting off with number 1, keyword research in advance.
Yes, a very simple one, probably the most obvious when it comes to anything that you're going to do in the SEO world. But what I want to focus on is the sense of scale that you should be thinking about if you want to really scale the impact of the SEO and the content that you have on your website. So my recommendation is to spend the time thinking strategically in advance so that you can be really aware of what other topics that people search for one step before they need your product or your service. Then you can also look at the more bottom of the funnel type topics, which would be necessary for people who need what you can offer. And then you can look at the content that might be helpful for people who have already converted and maybe need some kind of loyalty with you. But I would do this keyword research at such a scale that you end up with hundreds, if not thousands of potential articles done in one spreadsheet, neatly organized and categorized however you like, so that you have this huge backlog and you can just focus on delivering that content and publishing it on your website.
And is priority always going to be the content that would be one step before the consumer actually potentially makes a decision to purchase something from you?
I think it's really going to vary based on what your brand, what your website, what your product is. If you take the case of Wise, that's quite an important step for us because hidden fees in money transaction isn't something that everybody is quite familiar with. If you've never had to send money internationally before and you try to send money to somebody else, you probably would just use whatever you already have. Any service or kind of financial provider that you already bank with or use, you would probably use, and you're not aware that there's a fee. Sometimes, in fact, they'll tell you there is no fee, there's zero fee, £0. But what you need to know is that the markup itself is hidden in the exchange rate. So if you compare the exchange rate you're offered with the exchange rate you can find on Google, you'll see the difference. There's your fee. That's the money that you're paying. The problem when people aren't aware of the problem itself, is that people don't tend to naturally search for how do I save money when I'm sending money internationally? But they are looking for things that we know would later lead to an international use case. So they might be looking at information about traveling abroad or moving abroad or something which implies that there's going to be a cross-currency action needed in the future, which is where we can then make sure that there's content in place to say, hey, when it comes to your money, check out Wise.
Absolutely. And I used to work in the space as well. So I'm very much aware that it's largely all built into exchange rates. And it's very frustrating when dealing with comparison sites and they don't incorporate exchange rates as part of their comparison between which card is more expensive. And it's hard for consumers as well because it's such a variable. Today, the exchange rate is highly different from what it was yesterday, potentially.
It is so confusing. It is really confusing. And I think everybody understands that it's confusing and that's why they do it. If you just need to simplify it, the most important thing to look at is what is the end amount of money that your recipient or that you are going to get. And you want that money to be as much as possible. So whichever option when you're comparing leads to the highest amount of money at the end, don't worry about what the fee is or the markup because that's going to be the best deal for you.
And step number 2 is focus on content output.
Yeah, so I'm fast developing a new motto, which is never stop publishing new content. And if we take the example at Wise, so there's one team in particular called the SEO content team. It is now 40 plus people operating in around 60 markets with a huge number of different languages. So we have really scaled this team over the years. And the key to that success has been never stop publishing new content. The primary KPI for people in this team is content production. So can they publish a certain number of pieces of content every single quarter? Because we did the keyword research in advance, we have this long plan, this backlog. Then we focus on publishing. And so what that means is that the blog, just the blog alone at Wise is over 15,000 unique pages. And by focusing on publishing this content over the long term, we can see that it's gone from, say, 2,000 to 15,000 articles in the last 4 years. And then the traffic has gone up into the multiple millions per month. It's correlated really nicely, but not necessarily in a perfect, not always perfect kind of way. So that's why I say focus on content output, is because it's within your control. If you focus on traffic as your primary KPI, there's going to be months where it's down. There's going to be periods where it's flat. There's going to be lots of frustration, and you might be tempted to make short-term decisions. Whereas by focusing on something like content output based on really solid keyword research, then you have a longer-term vision in play, which you are working towards over the years. Like, it's taken us years.
And is there a point that updating existing articles becomes more effective than adding new articles?
This is a great question that we ask and we debate a lot internally. Honestly, you need both of those things, because if you're familiar with managing content and SEO, you will understand that some of your content becomes the kind of the highest contributor to your growth. So that maybe it's the conversions or the traffic, the revenue, whatever you're tracking. Those few articles, that small percentage of content that really performs better than everything else, you need to keep on top of. You need to keep it fresh. You need to keep it updated and optimized. So I think the answer is balance. You need to definitely make time to optimize content, which you can see could be better or could be maybe split out or combined, whatever you need to do. But don't stop publishing new content in exchange for the optimization. So I would never pause. Think of it like compound interest. I would never pause publishing new content just to focus on optimizations. You have to find a way to do both.
And step number 3 is think macro, act local.
Exactly. So like I said, this is a big team with lots of different markets to cover. And the product at Wise, you probably wouldn't know, but it's different in different countries. It's at different levels of maturity, different levels of popularity. But what we have found is that regardless of the language, regardless of the market, people tend to behave in a similar way. So we can have a really data-informed and data-led approach to planning new content. So I would say 90%, 95% of the content that we plan in new markets and new languages is content that has already worked for us in our older, more established markets. And maybe 5% of the content that we plan is completely unique to a local market. So for example, something we publish that's meant for Argentina, perhaps it wouldn't work anywhere else, and we'll just leave that for Argentina. But what we do is operate on this larger scale, where we look at broader topics, broader themes and categories that we can write content about. And then we find ways to localize those to all the different languages and markets. Using local keyword research, our team speak the language natively, and then they create unique content in that language rather than a direct translation.
I was going to ask you about local keyword research. Obviously, you can't directly translate necessarily the keywords that are an existing success for you in a current market, because obviously they might not use the same phraseology in a new market. So you use people on the ground, do you, to actually determine that an article is relevant using the local phraseology for that new market?
Exactly. They will do the keyword research. So they'll look at what's performing really well, most likely in English. It's the language we tend to publish first in. They'll look at what's performing really well in English, and then they'll do their keyword research in their own language to find out if the opportunity is there in a different format, maybe a synonym, something that's similar. It's been an interesting challenge having to scale into so many languages and countries. In this scenario, if anybody listening or watching this finds themselves in this kind of scenario, there were 2 options which I took early on, which I think could be helpful. So the first is hiring what I call a new market specialist. So someone whose job is just to test new markets on a quarterly basis. So they could just do some simple keyword research, either outsource to a freelancer who can speak a language and help you out, or even something as simple as Google Translate, just to get some early data together. You could publish a few pieces of content, like probably 20, 30, 40 pieces of content, and then assess to see how it performs. If it works really well, then you have some justification and data to hire a full-time person to grow that market. If it doesn't work out, then you haven't really lost anything. Or you could skip that hire altogether and just outsource maybe some local keyword research to a freelancer, and then a content writer who can speak the language to get it uploaded. Do your best with Google Translate to sort of assess the quality, see how it works before you overcommit and put too much out that you can't take back.
So is what you've just described number 4, do your homework in new markets, or is there anything you want to add to that?
There is one thing I'd like to add to that, because it is to do with marketing in markets that you're not familiar with, because there have been times that we've got it wrong and we've had to undo mistakes that we've made. And if you take, for example, the UK, people who are listening from the UK who work in marketing probably know of the ASA. We understand the rules and regulations that we have to work within when we're creating marketing, and SEO is no different. But every country kind of has their own version of that, and it's not okay to assume that what you know for the UK will work everywhere else. So, for example, in Singapore, the equivalent body tells you that you must not subvert family as a basic unit of society, which actually is not very easy to understand if you're not a Singaporean. So can I guarantee that my content for Singapore doesn't do that? I'm not sure. In Turkey, for example, you can't show images of people holding hands or kissing. So if I am translating or localizing a batch of 1,000 pieces of content from English for Turkey, do I have a process in place to catch stock imagery before I get myself in trouble? So that's what I mean by do the homework. What we do is kind of try and speak to some external support on the ground in that country who can give us a bit of guidance, create a framework that we call it a marketing playbook, so that then we have some rules in advance, because in the past we have launched content and had to completely delete it because we just didn't know that we had done something wrong.
So if a brand's listening that maybe hasn't got as much budget as you've got, and they're thinking, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my existing content, use AI to translate it, and just publish alternative versions of the website, different country versions of the website in different languages, just using AI. Is that not worth doing at all? Is that just a horrendous mistake to do?
My opinion is it's almost impossible to know. We all see these clickbait titles of SEOs out there who have used AI to steal the traffic from another brand, and I've grown my website to have millions of visits just using these simple 3 things. I think you probably could get some short-term wins, but it's not a very long-sighted strategy. And if you take a company like Wise, like a highly regulated financial institution, our content is arguably your money, your lifestyle content. There are financial life-changing decisions that could be made. I would never trust AI to write content that somebody is going to read. So I don't know what the future will hold. Maybe AI content will be penalized. Maybe we just need to do a better job of ensuring the quality of the AI content. But I think if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Step number 5 is powerful reporting.
Powerful reporting. So it's quite ironic that we call this powerful reporting, because you just made a comment about like other companies with lower budgets. This is a very low budget reality. So what we have connected to the blog with all the 15,000 articles is a really bulky, slow, horrible to use Google Sheet. And this Google Sheet, we just have 1 row per article and 1 column per thing that we want to be able to track. So that would list things like the name of the person who created the content, or the date that the content was published or briefed or proofed. And so by adding these individual metrics that we want to track, we then connect it to Looker, but you could connect it to some other kind of data visualization tool, or just build a graph in Google Sheets if you don't want to connect it to anything. It's been really powerful in enabling me to answer content production style questions just with a graph. So I can see things like, what percentage of our content have we delivered this quarter? I can see what percentage of content is performing best in one market over another market. I can look at a topic versus a different topic. You can also assess the performance of the people in the team. So you could say, is somebody publishing a lot more content than they should be, or is somebody way behind who might need some support? So by having all these kind of manual tags on the individual content, I can segment and cut up the data in a way that is able and enables me to answer more content-led questions.
Do you ever target keywords that don't have any obvious search volume?
Yes, we do. We do actually. And I think that kind of comes down to giving your audience the best experience. So I think if you just take a really high-level view, if you're trying to provide the ultimate guide to somebody to take an action, say they want to move abroad, imagine that ultimate guide only contains like 17 things which happen to have search volume and skips the rest. That's a really fragmented piece of information. It's actually not helpful for the user. There's loads of gaps that they need to fill. So I actually am a big fan of completing the content all the way to the end, whether or not the long tail of the topic has any search volume. One thing I want to emphasize too is that you just need to be a bit strategic about how you get your traffic to those pages. So if you have the parent page or the pillar page, which is already generating the traffic, and within that content you link to the piece which has no search volume maybe, then you're okay because you've ensured that there are going to be eyeballs on that content. If you had that piece of content as an orphan page sat with no links and no thought process behind it, nobody would discover it and it would be a waste of time. But yeah, I think if you want to give the best content experience, you should do the whole topic.
And step number 6 is set realistic expectations.
SEO is a funny industry, and we're all familiar with the memes and the jokes around "it depends" because there's a lot of uncertainty. It's highly scientific, highly creative, and yet highly uncertain workflow quite often. So the content at Wise, on average, takes 5 to 6 months to reach its full maturity, and that number hasn't changed in the last 4 years. We checked year by year; it's roughly the same. So that means that when somebody comes knocking on my door to ask, when can I expect to see some change or some performance, at least I can say, well, on average, that's going to take at least 5 to 6 months. Let's have this conversation in 2 quarters' time. Also, not all content performs. So I was quite surprised. I dug into the numbers a little bit and found that 99.1% of the content that we've published has generated organic traffic, at least a visit, which is pretty cool. But only 72% of the content we published has caused a conversion, has made someone sign up and use Wise, which means that 4,200 pieces of content that we created have done nothing. They haven't earned us a penny in return. So that's fine. That's absolutely okay. I would never have planned, if you knew that it wouldn't work, you would never have planned to pay for and spend time creating and planning and uploading and monitoring this content. But when you understand the ratio of what content is successful, which content doesn't work out, then there's another expectation you can set that you just move on, focus on the stuff that's working well and do more of that and less of the stuff that doesn't work.
By content that's reached its full maturity, do you mean reached its maximum amount of organic visitors that it's referring?
Yeah, so when you look at it on the graph, it takes 5 to 6 months to reach that peak, and then inevitably it would either sort of stagnate or it could even decline depending on the SERP and the competitiveness of the keyword.
And step number 6 is cohort clarity.
Yeah, so this again links to powerful reporting in a way that it enabled me to answer questions which I couldn't answer before. And there's a genuine scenario that happened. It was in 2020. Lots of stuff was happening in 2020, as you remember. But what happened for us is one of our most significant markets had really stagnated, and there was nothing that we could do to get the traffic to go up. It wasn't going down, but it was just flat. And it was flat for a long time, maybe 12 to 18 months, looking at it month by month, quarter by quarter. I just couldn't figure out how we could get the growth back. And that's when we sort of looked at cohort view of this kind of performance data. And what that means is assigning the content to the cohort date that it was published. So this content was published in Q1 2018. This was Q2 2018, all the way through to the date that I was looking at the report. And so what it enabled me to do is segment a simple bar graph and look at the performance by published date in groups of quarters. And when I filtered to just content that was published before this stagnant period, I could see that the content was declining really significantly. We'd lost, I think it had gone from 500,000 quarterly visits to 200,000 quarterly visits. So it was a significant drop. And then when I flipped that and looked at just the content I've published since then, I could see the opposite. I could see huge growth. So it had gone from 0 to around 200,000 quarterly visits. So then when you look at the whole graph, the story is really clear. And what the story is is that my old content was declining, the new content was growing really successfully, and that meant that it was netting out flat. So suddenly what was once concerning to me about a kind of flat, stagnant period was actually a very reassuring realization, because I suddenly was very grateful that I continued to publish the new content and that we continued to invest, because we saw what the picture would have looked like if we didn't add the new stuff. It would have just been a huge drop. So then it changed the dynamic of the situation and enabled me to communicate what was going on under the surface way more clearly than I could before.
Do you ever struggle with management buy-in to actually encourage them to wait and keep on throwing more budgets at content when it perhaps might take a long time?
I would say we're in a fortunate position that we have a lot of success behind us now. So I think for the most part, we are left alone. But I would say one thing that really helps is one of the things I said earlier, which is to focus on content output. So then when we're reporting, we have a really clear view of how much content we plan to produce in a quarter, and then how much of that content we have produced. And we can show a graph of our total headcount. So how has the team grown? How has the total content output grown? And that allows other people who are engaged in the report, stakeholders around the business, to ask us questions which are more constructive and more actionable. So they can challenge us on, can you do 5% more content? Or what happened this quarter? What happened this month? Why did things drop off? You're hiring too quickly and I'm not seeing the growth to match. What's going on there? And so those are conversations that I'm very happy to have, because the answers are, really important things. But we don't tend to focus too much on what's going on with the traffic this month, because I think by now people are really bought into the really long-term nature of SEO.
And step number 8, ROI.
ROI, yeah, it's more an anecdote that I want to share, because it's to do with the measurement and understanding I'm an SEO guy, so I really, really value the work of SEO, and I can see how valuable it is, and I understand that lots of people do struggle to get buy-in or to communicate the value of SEO. So this is an anecdote that you can take with you and tell to whoever needs to hear it. But I actually was getting questions on why are you continuing to hire new people? Like, how is it gonna? This is because the team is like 40 plus, like I said, and at some point somebody's saying to me, well, it can't go forever. It can't become a team of 100. Like, where do we stop? What has to happen next? What do I need to understand? And these questions are coming from finance, quite understandably. So I worked with our finance business partner to do a bit of a study into the total costs that we had spent. So all the content and the salaries, the cost of the content production over a 4-year period. And then we looked at all of the revenue that we generated by that content over that same 4-year period. And we saw just for that 4-year period alone that the ROI was 6.9 times. So it was huge. It was significant. And what it really shows is that when you look at that year by year over time, the ROI gets even stronger. So this 6.9 times is just a 4-year cap, but obviously content doesn't just disappear. It doesn't vanish from Google without reason after 4-year period. There's no expiration date. It doesn't work like that. So the 4-year period kind of just happened. So what I'm interested to know next is once we get to the 5-year and the 6-year period of this study, I assume that ROI is going to continue to improve, because like I said, SEO performance is like compound interest. You need to invest in it, but invest in it consistently so that you get these returns over the long term.
A couple of quick follow-up questions. When's the break-even point? So you said 4 years, 6.9 times ROI. And also, how does that ROI compare with other marketing channels?
Actually, this leads me very nicely to the final point, which the 9th step, right, which is around patience, but it's still around measurement, because we can compare it to other channels. So in the early days of marketing at Wise, I think a really simple way to assess performance of any marketing channel is by using a simple payback model. So we needed to make sure that the money that we invest in that marketing channel would be earned back within a 12-month period. So then channels will communicate, what is your payback? Is it 12 or is it less than 12? And so the blog team that I've just been talking about is one of the standalone marketing channels at Wise, and we look at them all compared to each other. And so if you take a paid channel where obviously you invest a huge amount of media spend, arguably less headcount, they are consistently optimizing to try to stay just within that 12-month bracket. They have to hit it, and it's quite hard. Sometimes you have to optimize, you have to reduce your spend, you have to be really smart to be able to stay on top of that. for the SEO channels, the payback is something like 3 to 4 months, which means I could double this team. I could double the cost, and we probably still wouldn't hit that 12-month limit.
Right.
So it's huge. The kind of the margin that we have through SEO, that SEO can give you is really significant. So that's a really nice way that we can compare it to other channels, so to paid channels in particular. But then back to your point about break even, one thing I would emphasize is that obviously SEO can be an expensive investment up front. And I understand the frustration that people like me are asking you for money and for time and for trust, and then telling you that the results will come back in the future in a long time. But what we saw was that when you break down this payback model in the same kind of piece of analysis I referenced earlier, we could see that the payback for the first year was awful. It was way over 12 months, and it would completely fail to meet the criteria that we set for a sustainable marketing activity. But within 12 months of that period, after a year, it significantly dropped, because then you had time for the first year's worth of content to sort of reach maturity and start to generate traffic and conversions. So I'm not sure exactly what the break-even point is, but it's definitely happened somewhere for us, between that, after that first year, where suddenly then we drop below the payback, and we haven't got close to it since.
So obviously you oversee the SEO content success, but I just want to ask one semi-technical question that I'm sure you'll have at least an opinion on. Are you still seeing any challenges, ramifications from the domain change from transferwise.com to wise.com, or is that all in the rear view mirror now?
It is in the rearview mirror for sure. As you can imagine, the migration was a huge amount of work. I did not work on it. The technical team did such an amazing job of this. I'm so biased anyway, but honestly, I would say it's a really good case study into how migrations can be done successfully. It was pretty painless in terms of from a technical perspective, but obviously no SEO likes to see the kind of lag in rankings and the impact that you have to sort of endure. But by now, no, we're good. Everything is back.
Let's finish off with
the Pareto pickle.
So Pareto says that you can get 80% of your results from 20% of your efforts. What's one SEO activity you would recommend that provides incredible results from modest levels of effort?
Yeah, so I would like to keep on the theme of content production, what I've talked about so far today. And it's about briefing your content in a really smart way in bulk, essentially. So when you do that keyword research and you know that you have a long list of content to publish, the worst thing you could do is sort of brief those in article by article. Probably the logic would be that you're looking at search volume or competition, and you're thinking you've got some low-hanging fruits or some really high potential pieces, and you want those out first because it's exciting. But what I would say is group all of your content ideas in such a way that you can write one brief for one person or one agency, and in exchange, you could get 100, 200, 300 pieces of content. So the concept is that the content would have to be unique, but the structure should be identical. So if I could give a really simple example, I might find a keyword that's like, what does a £10 note look like? So I could create a brief, which is what does a X currency note look like? And then in return, I can get my pounds, I can get dollars, I can get euros, I can get every other currency that I need from one singular brief. And then that gives you a huge backlog of content. And then you just have to focus on publishing it.
Brilliant. I've been your host, David Bain. You can find Jared Keleher over at wise.com. Jared, thanks so much for being on the In Search SEO podcast.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for listening. Check out all the previous episodes and sign up for a free trial of the Similarweb platform over at Similarweb.com.